Influence frameworks are powerful frameworks for getting what you want. I think the place to start, because not all frameworks are simple. Remember how we were talking about there's foundational frameworks, there's 2-step frameworks, and then there's 12-step frameworks, right? The thing to understand is frameworks all fit within each other. They fit like nesting dolls, like Russian nesting dolls. So when you learn any kind of framework that has to do with influence, what you also have to learn are the sub-frameworks inside of it to be able to execute the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But the place to really start is understand that influence and persuasion are not the same thing, right? Persuasion is what happens when you actively put energy into changing someone's mind or getting someone to take a certain action with active energy. Influence is what you have when you're not talking. So I can sit here and try to persuade you to come with me to dinner. Mm-hmm. But that's not influence, that's persuasion. Influence is what happens when something happens in the world and I'm the one that comes into your mind and you're like, I wonder what Andy thinks about that. Which probably doesn't happen, but one day hopefully it will happen if I gain enough influence, right? That's the difference. Persuasion takes energy, influence is passive, it doesn't happen. It takes a lot of experience, it takes a lot of engagement, it takes a lot of assessment, energy, trust. It takes a lot of effort to get someone to a place where you have influence over them. But there's a framework for that. There are frameworks and frameworks within frameworks that I'm happy to teach if you want to go through those.
Yeah, whatever you think is most useful for me and my audience.
So I'll start with this. I'll start at the lowest possible place, right? And the lowest possible place, if you think of influence up here as an umbrella, there's a sub framework inside of that umbrella, and then there's a third inside of that. So we're going to start with that one first and grow. And that framework is something called sense making. Because if I want to influence you or if you want to influence me, we have to make sense of the dynamic of our relationship. Meaning one of us has to be in power and one of us has to comply with the other person's power. That's the whole goal of sense making. So that's why we are starting at that framework. Inside of sense making, if you imagine it like a cup, right? Sense making is like a cylinder. And just like you fill a cup with water, you'll fill this cylinder with sense. The bottom third of the cup is what we call avoidance. That's where every relationship starts. Every time you meet a new person, you try to avoid that person. It's the first thought you have, even if you don't want to admit it.
No, I'll admit it. No, that's very much the nature of my life.
That's the nature of that's human nature. We avoid what's new. So the first third is avoidance. So you've got to fill the water. You've got to fill the relationship. You have to put enough time and energy into the relationship to get past the bottom third. Now you're making sense. The next third is called competition. Competition is all about the exchange of information, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of energy, because in an exchange, you're building a relationship. Even if you're arguing, even if you disagree, even if you hate the other person and you're yelling in their face, you're still investing energy into that person. Whereas if you really didn't care about them, you would just avoid them altogether. The last third is called compliance. The whole reason that you compete is to have someone come out with compliance. And compliance is the part where the power dynamic is identified, right? So we've invested so much time in competition that now we're not arguing and fighting anymore. Now we're starting to make sense of our relationship. You've heard the phrase, we'll just agree to disagree. Essentially, that is the top of the sense-making cylinder. You've filled the cup. And where you land at the end is, we'll just agree to disagree, which is kind of a mutual understanding of each other's position on whatever it was that you were competing over. But you're still a unit. You've still invested into a relationship. So sense-making is filling that first cup, because now what we know at the conclusion of this phase is that we're in this together. I've poured water in, you've poured water in, and if there's anything that human beings hate to do, it's waste their energy. So I've put all this energy into you, you've put all this energy into me, and now we have a dynamic between us. Once there's sense, once we understand, and remember, this is, if we agree to disagree, then we've made sense of our relationship as mutual peers on this particular topic, politics. That doesn't mean that we're mutual peers in terms of conversations about family or conversations about business or conversations about, you name it, exercise, right? But we have a relationship enough that now we can talk about those other things. Mm-hmm. So if I want to build influence, or if you want to build influence, the first thing we have to do is not let people avoid us. We have to get past the avoidance. And then we have to compete with them to get them to invest their time and energy into our relationship. And then we have to get to a place where there's some sort of compliance, even if it's only the compliance to sit and listen to me when I share my opinion that you already know you're going to disagree with. That's still compliance. That's the foundational framework that feeds up into a secondary framework that we call know, like, trust. Know, like, trust is something that actually exists in the social media world, which was a really awesome surprise to me to find it there. KLT, know, like, trust, starts with discovery. If you don't know something exists, you can never like it because you don't even know it exists. Mm. Once you know something exists, you have to decide whether or not you like it. Well, how do you decide whether or not you like it? Through this avoidance, competition, compliance, sense-making process. Because as soon as you discover something new, it's new. So guess what you try to do? Avoid it. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So after you get through the end of the compliance phase of sense-making, you like whatever it is or whoever it is that you're dealing with. Maybe you don't like them like they're your best friend, but you've invested all this time and energy into them, so you do like them. The secret sauce at CIA that we know that most people don't understand is that you don't have to like something a lot before you start to trust it. You've heard the term falling in love. Mm-hmm. There's also a very real term called falling into trust. You just spend enough time, long enough, and what happens is, without even realizing it, you start to trust the person that you're with. That is the beginning of influence. Even if I'm wrong, even if you disagree with me every step of the way, even if the only thing you like about me is going out and having a pint on Friday night, where we debate and argue and bitch at each other about politics, you still like Friday night going to the bar and sharing a pint with me. You still like hanging out with me when we watch our two different soccer teams play or football teams play. So because you like me enough to be with me, there will come a time where I win your trust in something, in some area. Maybe it's trust because I'm the only person who drinks with you. So in a moment, you decide to tell me about how much you hate your boss, and now I'm the only one that knows you actually hate your boss. Whatever it might be, you will fall into trust. We all fall into trust. It's one of the things that's natural to human beings that we hate about ourselves is we trust the wrong people. It happens to all of us.
So someone can trust you in terms of influence, even if they don't like you?
Correct, because they will be invested enough into you that they believe something is predictable. Think about somebody that you don't like. Think about somebody you really, really don't like.
Yeah.
Are there still things about them that you would trust them to do? Maybe not things they would do for you, but there are certain things that you would trust that they would do. I already know that person's gonna, say something stupid to my kid. I already trust that person is gonna put their garbage can at the end of my driveway. So it's fascinating because we usually think of trust as only being a positive term. Trust is an ambiguous. It is an agnostic term. It doesn't mean good things or bad things. It just means a predictable outcome.
So fresh on